Now that we've looked at how we can use button clicks to change the HTML, how to change the content of paragraphs, let's now look at how we can change the CSS, the styling of our sites. So now we're going to have even more fun. So I've created something here where I can click on this button and a few things are going to change. As you can see, the background color of my paragraph has gone blue and the background of the body here has turned red. So as always, we're just going to start from bare bones and we'll go together from there. So I'm just going to delete all of these lines so that all we have left is pretty much an empty HTML file. It's connected to our JavaScript file. And just in case you want to take a peek at what we've done here, feel free. I'm just going to delete it now. We're going to recreate that very soon. So let's start off just by creating the basics. I'm going to create a header that just says style changing CSS for the better. And then underneath I'm going to create a paragraph that I'm going to want to change. So this is the boring paragraph. And so I'm going to give it an ID because we know we're going to want to access this paragraph to change it in a moment. So I'm just going to give this an ID of boring P, the capital P. And then I'm going to create a button just underneath. And I'm going to right click to change everything. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this name because we don't need it. So far I've just created the basic HTML. What's important is that I've given, an ID, that's better. I've given my paragraph an ID of boring P. So now what we can do is we can start working with our JavaScript just to get things working. So I'm just going to go through this quite systematically so that we get, so that I instill into you an idea that you want to progress your functionality slowly so you make sure that you're doing things correctly at every step. So just to begin with, I'm going to make sure that the button's working properly. So I'm going to have an onClick and function, so equals, and then we're going to call the function obviously something like change CSS. And then with the empty brackets at the end, don't forget the empty brackets. Now I'm going to create this function, so obviously I'll write function first, then change CSS, empty brackets. Now instead of actually changing the CSS, I'm just going to make sure that the button is connected to the JavaScript correctly. So I'm just going to do an alert, just saying working. So this is a good systematic way, just to make sure at this point, okay, yeah, everything's working, the files are connected. Okay, fantastic. Let's move on to the next thing. Well, before we were able to change the HTML, so let's just test that the ID is working by essentially changing the HTML like we did in the last one, and this will be good revision. So the first thing we do is write in document.getElement.byId, and then the ID name is boring P, and then you might be able to remember the next bit, dot, and then inner HTML equals working. So that's the next step of us making sure everything's working correctly. Okay, fantastic, that seems to be working. So actually I'm going to keep this in. I'm just going to say this is the new fun paragraph. I'm going to add even more exclamation marks because, well, you know how fun you are based on the number of exclamation marks you have. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the CSS. So the first thing we need to do is we need to access the same thing. So we need to access the element itself. So we're going to access that ID. So we do the same thing we've done before. Document.getElementById. So it's the exact same process as before. There we go. Boring P. So at this point we've now accessed the element. Now instead of changing the inner HTML, we're going to change the style. Okay? And once we've put this in, then we can select the properties, just like we did before with background color, font family, height, width, border, all that kind of stuff can work in here. Although slightly annoyingly, it's a different syntax. So in CSS, for example, we would have done this, right? Background dash color. Unfortunately not. So JavaScript doesn't accept that it's hyphenated, so we have to do something called camel case, which is where we have the second word is a capital. So we do background color like this, and then equals, let's go for red. Have that semicolon on the outside. Okay, now let's refresh. And as you can see now, not only has the HTML changed, because we did what we did in the last lecture, but we've now been able to change the CSS. And we've done that by accessing the ID as we normally do, document.getElementById, then the name of the ID, and then we've put .style to access the style, or the CSS, whatever you want to call it, and then we're changing the background color. Now if you ever want to reference the syntax on what you have to use to change different properties, you can always go to w3schools.com, and here if you just search for HTML DOM style object, it will give you a nice long list of all the different things you can do. So I'm just going to search. So let's say for example I'm not sure on background color, so I go background dash color, and here you go. It says in the description, and this is what I use, background with an uppercase C color, and it's got all the properties that you could need. So for example, you can see that border is just fine, sets or returns border width, border style, and border color in one declaration. So things like that. So we could even give that a try now. So instead of background color, or let's say include as well as background color, we're going to add a border. So let's give that a try. So we go to document.getElementById, and change that to boring P. There we go, and then we're going to change the style, border, equals, let's go for 3px, solid, green. And then save that. Now if we click this, not only do we have the background color, but we also have the border. So hopefully you're starting to get a bit of a knack for what's going on here and how it works. Like I say, you can always check out the W3 Schools section, and you just search for HTML DOM style object, and you'll get the long list. Now just one more thing to add, we don't necessarily we can change the all elements, so we don't always have to use getElementById. We could do something as simple as document.body, and then we can just say we want to change the style of the body. So you remember us using body in CSS, for example, which is basically just the whole of the page, or the background of the page. So let's just change the background of that as well. So document.body.style.background color equals, let's go for pink. So you can see that you don't just need to do things by getting elements, you can just give the name of the thing here. So click on that, and there we go, the body's working as well. So I hope that all makes sense. Definitely give this a go yourself, and then I'll see you in the next lecture.